Hi, it's Mark Hockman, not of PC World for this video. I'm not sure if PC World's going to have a wrap-up of what we saw for the Surface event, but I wanted to go ahead and use this as sort of my video notes of what I saw and my impressions of what I saw, and to talk a little bit about, about how each of these devices sort of plays into Microsoft's ecosystem. So, if I had to pick a word to describe what we saw, and again to sort of recap, we saw the Surface the Surface Duo and the Surface Neo. We saw the Surface Pro X and the new Surface laptop, including the new 15-inch version. We go back to the Surface Pro 7, as well as the Surface Earbuds. All of those devices, especially the Surface Duo and the Surface Neo, were probably represented the most epic launch of Microsoft Surface devices, dating back to its history of, 10, 12 years ago, I guess it was. I was at the first Microsoft Surface launch in LA, and I have to say that this was clearly the most diverse and interesting group of products they've ever produced. Diversity, I guess, would be sort of the watchword from what we saw. We saw a diversity of products, of form factors, of applications, and even of operating systems, if you talk about Android as well. In terms of excitement, the Surface Neo and the Surface Duo clearly dominated the discussion, and well, they should. Both of them are folding devices. The Duo is the sort of the phone-esque version, while the Neo is sort of the laptop-esque version. And when we look at the Duo and the Neo, I think we have to look at, again, at this theme of diversity. We aren't just in a world where we have a smartphone and a laptop and a desktop. We're seeing sort of subcategories emerge from all of these. And the most recent one, of course, is the folding phone. We've seen the birth and sort of rebirth of the Galaxy Fold and the sort of associated problems with that design. The Duo seems to be going in a slightly different direction. And the difference is, of course, is with the Fold, it's one sheet of, you call it glass, but it's not. It's actually plastic. And that leads to both a coherent, uniform image, but also the possibility of a crease, and as we've seen, the possibility of degradation in the device itself. Microsoft, with the Duo, is going in a slightly different direction. So it's essentially two screens, sort of separated by, I wouldn't say imperceptible, but slightly perceptible display gap. And it runs Android. And what we've seen, of course, is that Microsoft has tried and failed with Windows Phone on its own operating system. And with Android, though, it's found sort of a fertile ground for its apps and services. Edge, OneDrive, all these things, all of these things sort of naturally lend themselves to Android because of iOS and its walled garden approach. Android offers Microsoft much more flexibility and leeway to put what devices and what apps and services it wants on those devices. So, with the Neo, we've got an Android device. We're not sure exactly what operating system it's going to run in terms of the flavor of Android. We're not necessarily certain if it's going to be sort of a derivative of Android, sort of Microsoft's own skin or a derivative of it, because of the two screens. It may just mean that both screens are treated as a giant screen, and devices and apps sort of move from one side to the other, or there might be something a little bit different. We haven't quite seen it at this point in time. I should say that Microsoft did allow some people to sample the Neo and the Duo back at the Surface launch. There was sort of a tiered approach to access, where the hoi polloi were sort of able to view it behind a rope. Some people had access to it where they could sort of handle it, but they couldn't actually videotape it or shoot it with a phone or shoot it with a camera. And some people were given a little bit more access as well. It's a little bit. It was an interesting and unique approach that I haven't seen in 25 years of being a reporter. That was Microsoft's choice of how they handle it. The fact that we weren't able to have a decent hands-on time with it allows me to be, I guess, a little bit more honest and open about what we saw and what we think the potential is. I would say that the Duo and the Neo both, look actually fairly positive right now, though I'm not entirely certain how useful either device will be. The Duo harkens back to the days of Continuum. the Windows Phone sort of PC-esque desktop that would run in conjunction with both devices. Remember that Continuum offered the possibility of plugging in your phone into your PC and essentially your phone into a display, and essentially powering your PC, or powering a PC, or powering a PC-like experience from your phone, where all the apps actually run on it. With the Duo, we're not sure. I'm not exactly sure if we're going to be seeing a PC-esque environment or not. I think it's going to be more traditionally like an Android phone. But remember that, again, with the Duo, we're not necessarily seeing a phone per se. We're seeing a computing device with telephony tapped sort of layered on top of that. And that's also what Microsoft seems to be implying when Windows Phone died. It seemed to be basically implying that it would go in that direction for the future, and it seems like the Duo is sort of the culmination of that. It'll be interesting to see exactly how that plays out once holiday 2020 rolls around. We're going to see probably other folding devices at that time. We're going to see the traditional smartphones, the Galaxy devices, the Apple iPhone, and so forth. It's going to be a device for somebody who wants a larger display and a little bit more functionality. It'll be interesting to see how it plays out. I think that's sort of the jury is out on that right now. The Neo, however, is certainly one thing that looks promising, I would say. We've had sort of the idea of tablets being a little bit too large to hold, phones being perhaps a little bit too small. That's where we've had the folding devices come out of it. The Neo, however, is sort of a split between a tablet and a traditional clamshell. I mean, essentially it's a folding Surface Pro, right? And with the Neo, the fact that it does offer folding is useful, but I think the most interesting part of that device is actually the keyboard. Microsoft has always offered at least the option of a type cover or a touch cover in association with the Surface, whereas other devices, such as the Amazon Kindle and especially the Apple iPad, didn't. In fact, when you, during the days where I covered Apple for the short time, Apple would offer sort of pride of place, the first few rows of the theater, the Infinite Loop campus, to people who were actually taking notes, tapping on glass on the iPad. And I always felt a little sorry for those people, just because I felt that a traditional keyboard was simply the most effective and efficient way to go ahead and take notes. And I think the Surface keyboards are excellent. I use a Surface Book 2 on a regular basis, and the key travel on that is exceptional. Much better than even other laptops in its category. So the fact that Microsoft included a keyboard, a sort of fold-out keyboard, which looks like it's going to be an optional accessory, but still, a fold-out keyboard which partially covers the secondary display, is a really smart, thoughtful addition, because now you can use a keyboard instead of tapping on glass. But also too, Microsoft's accommodated the space and the keyboard takes. I mean, it takes up part of that secondary screen, and the secondary screen occasionally, I guess, becomes sort of what they're calling this a Wunderbar, right? Sort of a pun on the German word Wunderbar, where you can use it as a secondary screen for whatever, perhaps it could be a place for a small window of email, for example, or a calendar or something of that sort. But this accommodates the keyboard in a way that is, again, both thoughtful and is carrying the right word? I'm not entirely certain. But with the Neo, of course, it transforms back into sort of the traditional ways, the traditional form factors of a 2-in-1. You can fold it back into tent mode. You can use it as a laptop. You can use it as a big tablet as well. Again, a really interesting, not necessarily, I don't want to say it's going to be unsuccessful or unviable, because I think it is. And I think that's the point that Microsoft's making here, is that people work in different ways. And I actually sort of laid that out in a separate story. Modalities are Microsoft's stock and trade. You can type, you can touch, you can speak to your computer, you can use eye tracking, you can use ink, you can use an Xbox controller, you can go ahead and use holograms. All of these are different ways to interact with Windows and the world, the virtual world around you. And Microsoft simply adapting this to hardware, where dual screens are essentially a different way of interacting with Windows. I'm not sure it's necessarily going to work for everyone, but the fact of the matter is that it's going to work for somebody. And that, I think, is one of the strengths of Microsoft's product line. Now, if you get past the two folding devices, you get back into the more traditional Surface form factors. But of those, the Surface Pro X is probably the most interesting of all of them. The Surface Pro X is actually a device that runs not on a Intel device, but on a Qualcomm device. It's actually a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8CX, which we've seen before. The Snapdragon 8CX is a derivative of the 855, which is a derivative of just the Snapdragon processors, which power a lot of the world's smartphones. All-day battery life on a phone, but also on a PC. Always-on connectivity via modem, LTE modem. These are the things that are now being adapted to the Microsoft Surface device, and it's not an 8CX per se. It's an upclocked 8CX, 3 gigahertz. It's an octa-core, 8-core device, which is actually sort of a custom device, which is actually called the Microsoft SQ1. And the SQ1 basically transforms the Surface into an all-day, always-on, always connected device, which I think is really the idea that Surface had to begin with. I mean, Surface has always been a device where you want to go ahead and use it everywhere, right? And we've had increases in battery life, both with the Surface Pro, but especially the Surface Laptop. But they've never had the connectivity angle nailed down, right? They've always had a Surface Pro device, and then they've always come out with a sort of a Surface LTE or a Surface Laptop with LTE or whatever it might be, 3 months or 6 months later. And for somebody who wants that functionality immediately, you have to wait for it. Now you don't with the Surface Pro X. The problem is, of course, or possible problem, is that in fact it does use Windows. It's Windows on ARM, which has had issues with performance. Recall that we've tried out devices with the 855 on them. Some of it is just the how slowly the processor runs. Some of it, of course, is the emulation. Windows doesn't necessarily run on ARM natively. It has had to use emulation. It's not quite clear how much emulation is going on here. Microsoft's tried to sort of improve things on the back end, and I haven't actually gotten a great clear answer from them on how much of this is emulation. I will tell you that when we were actually running these devices, when we were testing the devices in the demo room, we saw a lot of obviously optimized apps. Edge, for example, optimized to run on ARM. Edgium, or however you want to, whatever it is, the Chromium-based evolution of Edge was also there, which was interesting because they wouldn't let me load Chrome on the machines. And Chrome has traditionally run a little bit more slowly. And in fact, Edgium and Edge, there was a little bit of a chop to it, just a tiny bit of a stutter, but you have to accommodate the fact that this might be a pre-production device. There was the Wi-Fi was obviously being clogged by everything under the sun there. There's a lot of caveats that you can put on that. So I'm really hoping that the Pro X evolves into the device that I hope it to be, and that's an always-on, always-connected device. Of course, there's the issue of who pays for that connectivity, but hopefully at some point we'll have that all worked out. Now, if you get past the Pro X, then you get back again into the more traditional devices. The Surface Laptop is probably the most interesting of those. And that, of course, is the fact, that, of course, comes from two things. One, of course, is the 13-inch, and now is the new 15-inch display, or 15-inch form factor. And the 15-inch is powered by AMD's Mobile Ryzen. So, the 13-inch is the traditional laptop that you've known and loved. The Surface Laptop 3 is powered by an Ice-like processor. That's Intel's 10th generation processor. I'm not entirely certain we're going to see... It's unclear because we haven't actually tested Ice Lake thoroughly. We've had a sort of a preview of it, and Ice Lake is roughly comparable CPU-wise, it seems like, to Whiskey Lake, the 8th gen predecessor, which was honestly somewhat comparable CPU-wise to Kaby Lake R, which was its predecessor. Where Ice Lake shines, of course, is in the graphics. The Core i5 and the Core i7 models of the Ice Lake processors inside the Surface Laptop include the Iris Plus graphics, that's where you get some real potent performance there. Iris Plus is actually quite good. As far as Gordon Maung's performance preview of Ice Lake showed, it was, in the neighborhood of like 40% when you got into things like video transcoding with Handbrake, and I have to expect that graphics performance on games is going to be sort of roughly comparable. So that's really good news. Now, the interesting thing, of course, is that we have the other sort of question mark in the 15-inch, and that's the Mobile Ryzen processor from AMD. Now, Mobile Ryzen within AMD is not the Ryzen 2 architecture that really is dominating the headlines in the desktop space. It's the older Ryzen, not Ryzen 2, the Zen 2 architecture is what's dominating the desktop space. In the mobile space, inside the 15-inch, we're seeing a Zen Plus architecture, which is in fact sort of the previous generation. That implies performance isn't going to be so hot, but we've yet to see that as well. I mean, this is, again, not a traditional, what we'd say, Ryzen chip. This is, in fact, another sort of SoC, essentially. This is the, and this is a mouthful, so I'm going to read it from my notes. You have the option of the Ryzen 5 3580U Radeon Vega 9 Surface Edition, or the Ryzen 7 3780U Radeon RX Vega Surface Edition as well. What this means is that you're pairing the older Ryzen with the older Vega part, but Vega as well as the new Navi parts have traditionally had more graphics horsepower than Intel. Intel saying with Ice Lake that that's not true. Again, we haven't really tested this to figure out what's what, but you do have the option of choosing between an Ice Lake and a Ryzen processor here. If you're a business user, you'll also have the option of selecting a 15-inch with an Intel Ice Lake processor as well. That's not being offered in the consumer space, but if you're a business user, you'll have that choice. Again, it remains to be seen whether AMD is in fact going to be the chip that you want to have in this regard, in this space, or if people are going to sort of just try to sneak a business version of the Surface Laptop 3 out to get that Ice Lake performance. I honestly don't know which is going to win here. We're going to go ahead and test to find out. Again, all this diversity lends itself to a lot of testing, but that's what we love. We're going to have some opportunities to sort of play around with hardware, make some calls, and really sort of just point out which is best for which consumer. So the final thing, as far as the Surface is concerned, is the Surface Pro 7, which, honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about here. The Surface Pro 7 looks a lot like the Surface Pro 6, which will look like the Surface Pro 5, or the 2018, or whatever, the 2017, or whatever they were calling it, which Surface Pro 4. The Surface Pro design has remained unchanged for generations. The difference between the Surface Pro 7 and the Surface Pro X is that the Surface Pro X was actually designed aggressively. It's an aggressive redesign. It's sort of a Surface Pro for the future, whereas the Surface Pro 7 is more of a Surface Pro for the past. Probably should have noted the Surface Pro X, as well as the Surface Laptop, as well as the Surface Pro 7 now include USB-C, which, my goodness, we've been waiting for this for a while. It's been on the Book 2, it's been on the Surface Go, but I mean, a year or two ago, USB-C was a necessity. Now I think it is. You could argue that Thunderbolt is also a necessity. Thunderbolt doesn't appear on any of the Surface devices at this point in time, including the new ones. Thunderbolt simply offers more I/O. USB-C is more of an expansion capability, as well as some I/O to power an external display, but not as much as, say, Thunderbolt's concerned. I don't know if that's going to be necessary or not. Thunderbolt's definitely future-proofing. We've sort of dinged laptop makers for not having it in the past. Whether it matters or not for the Surface, I'm not quite sure. One more thing I should have mentioned with the Surface Pro X before too. It also does away with a number of ports. If you want to call it the Panos Snap, right? So USB Type A is gone. The mini display port is gone, and the headphone jack is gone. I mean, this is a Surface for the future rather than the Surface of the past. The Surface Pro 7 has those. It has USB-C, it has the Type A, it has the mini DisplayPort. These are all things that have traditionally appeared on the Surfaces in the past, and they're going to be there in the future, I guess, as well. Traditional, typical kickstand. Ice Lake form factor, Ice Lake processor as well. No AMD options, no Qualcomm options, nothing fancy in that regard. But useful stuff. If you're a Surface fan, the Surface Pro 7 is going to be for you. It's a little bit cheaper than the Pro X. That's that's pretty much it as far as that regard. With the Surface earbuds are an interesting one. I liked, and I never had a chance to review, the Surface headphones, which are sort of the predecessor here, just because of the fact that the Surface headphones sort of thought about what it would be like to work in a crowded environment. Panos Panay, the chief product officer for Microsoft, talks about flow, and I completely agree with him. I am a fan of a relatively quiet environment, a relatively private environment. You're seeing me work at home here with this, kind of goofy screen in the back, so you don't see all the piles of review hardware and things that I have behind me. I think that headphones, the Surface headphones with its noise cancellation capabilities were excellent. I really did. I was impressed with the Cortana integration, and I think that's, something that's, unfortunately gone away somewhat, because Cortana has itself sort of been diminished within the Microsoft hierarchy, but, I was intrigued by them. I would have liked to review them. Surface earbuds are a little bit of the same thing, but with a divergent focus, I would say. Here it's not about Cortana. It's about transcription and about Microsoft speech services, which is interesting because in the day before I recorded this, Microsoft said that speech services, the cloud-based transcription, would be coming to Microsoft Word. If you've ever used dictation in Word, it's pretty lousy. I mean, you have to click that mic up there. You have to train the model. And it's just not as good as, say, talking to Google Assistant or Siri, or maybe not Siri, Google Assistant or Alexa or even Cortana. I mean, if you have a cloud version of these things, it can train your model against thousands or even millions of people, and it's just going to have better recognition. And this is what the Surface earbuds offer. So the Surface earbuds, aesthetically, I mean, I have to say, I'll be honest with you, they're a little bit reminiscent of sort of the gauges that people put in ears, and these are sort of these penny or even larger sized discs that people put in for aesthetic purposes. Some people find them attractive. I'm not as much of a fan of them as other people might be. They look a lot like them because they're simply a earbud which doesn't fit all the way into your ear. It fits kind of, I wouldn't say loosely, but it fits. It doesn't jam into your ear. It sort of has a few touch points which intersects with your ear canal. It's comfortable. I hate inner ear earbuds, and this actually felt comfortable in the short time that I was using it. So from that standpoint, I think they've got that right. But it's an earbud with a big quarter-sized white circle on the outside of it. That white circle is a control surface. You can use it to you tap it a couple of times, tap, and it pauses and plays your audio or plays your music. You can swipe up and down to control your volume. There's a couple of other different commands to enable transcription, I think to trigger Office 365 apps and so forth. The concept is great, and the transcription service is something that I'm really in favor of, just because there are people who, especially if you get into an environment like this one, a closed environment, feel pretty comfortable in talking to a computer. You get inside of a coffee shop, you get inside of a shared workspace, that goes away, I think. Again, another reason why I like the Surface headphones. But the transcription services worked well. I think that we're going to see sort of more of this being used as far as Microsoft's vision of the Office of the future in the future. Again, I think the earbuds have potential. They're a little bit on the expensive side. I think they're $250 or so. But in addition to that, you've got this sort of audio technology. And let me see if I can quickly find too many tabs open. Here we are. Surface earbuds. You've got the what do they call this thing? They call it the I can't see this. Can't find the name right now. Anyways, it's basically a trained model where they worked with real world situations to essentially deliver the best audio experience for things like Spotify. Nothing for necessarily for productivity. That's useful. They're waterproof. Essentially, IPX4 rating. They're quote unquote waterproof. They work with Android. They work with Windows 10. They work with iOS. I think that the earbuds probably aren't. Unfortunately, I would like to compare the earbuds to the headphones. I'm not sure if we'll get the opportunity to do so. I don't know. It's I think the jury's out on these things. I'll be interested to see, in fact, what people think of them. I'll also be interested, in fact, to see if they remain a viable Surface product. The Surface headphones kind of came and went, which is a shame. And I'm not sure if the earbuds are going to do the same thing. So I'll be interested to see if Microsoft commits to them in the long term. So that's been a long, hopefully not too rambling, sort of summary of what I saw at the Surface event. Again, epic, best Surface launch event they've ever had. Lots of innovative, thoughtful products, a diversity of form factors, a diversity of processors. There's a lot to choose from within Microsoft. And if Microsoft's vision holds true, we're going to see a diversity of things from other manufacturers as well. I mean, we've already seen some of this at Computex with the dual screen stuff. Devices that sort of push the limits of what people necessarily think about in terms of a computer. And again, not all these are going to be successful, and that's fine. One of the things that we just love about, or what I love about technology and what I love about Silicon Valley is that there is a diversity of products. People are trying things. God, we've remained so staid for like decades, right? And now we're seeing like just phones and laptops and just all these different devices really pushing the envelope. And you know what? We're heading into the people talked about the PC being dead, but the PC isn't the PC anymore. It's a PC is numerous things. And that's great. I mean, I think if I'm enthused about the whole thing, I came back really jazzed about what we might see from Microsoft and others. And, hopefully you'll see more of it either reviewed by me or by my PC World colleagues. And if there's anything that I have that I can't put on PC World, then hopefully I'll put it here. So thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please, leave comments and talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.